Hey, this is JJ Virgin. Welcome and thanks so much for joining me. This is Ask the Health Expert. Here I put the power of health in your hands and give you access to the top people in health and wellness. In each episode, I share safe ways to get healthy, lose weight, heal your gut, detox, and lots more. So if you want to get healthy and get off the dieting for life merry-go-round, I'll give you strategies that will help you look and feel better fast. So what have you done for your brain today? That is what we are going to be talking about. And we're going to talk about a new concept out there. You probably heard about lifespan, how long you live. And then the next step up is health span. How long do you live well? And Dr. Bryce Wylde, my guest today, is now talking about brain span. How long do you live cognitively well? I'm super excited to be sharing this with you today. I'm just going to give you a little heads up. You're getting his book for free. And you can get it at jjvirgin.com/brain spanners. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest, Dr. Bryce Wylde. He's a leading health expert and clinician specializing in integrative and functional medicine, nutrition, and supplementation. He blends the latest in science and technology with traditional and ancient remedies. He's also the co-founder of the DNA Company. And I have done, just lately a podcast with my buddy Cash, who is the other founder of the DNA Company, and such great information. So make sure you check that out too. He's the author of 4 national best-selling books. He's the previous host of CTV's Wild on Health. He's featured on countless network television shows, including Fox, NBC, ABC, CBS, and over the last decade, a regular guest expert and medical advisor on the Dr. Oz Show. And so again, be sure to grab the book, jjvirgin.com/brain spanners, and I will be right back with Dr. Bryce Wylde. You've been on before too, haven't you?
No, this is my first time with you. I've had you on mine recently, which is maybe why. I don't know.
All right, cool. Dr. Bryce Wylde, I thought you'd been a regular on the show, which clearly we will need to make you be a regular on the show, but I was compelled to have you on with the subtitle of your latest book, What Have You Done for Your Brain Today? That's so good.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. Well, we often get forgotten about here in Canada. This is where I am based, in Toronto, Canada, born and raised. I'm a dual citizen.
Tell. I can hear it in your oot.
In my oot and a boot. But we've got a really, pretty good healthcare system here, of which I'm proud of when it works. We've got our functional medicine gurus. So we're keeping up. We're keeping up with the Joneses here in Canada, I think. Yeah.
Well, I think healthcare should start at home. That's my own opinion. And I know a lot of the stuff that you do really helps people take this stuff home. But why did you decide to focus on the brain?
It was actually a major impetus was my own mom and my father-in-law. So back in 2017, they were dually diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Wasn't in the family. I had no idea really much. I mean, as a clinician myself, about the stages.
Both of them, mother and father-in-law.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, and pretty much the same stage. My mother was in education all of her life, and my father-in-law, pretty smart guy in engineering, and they can dupe you. An intelligent. Well, most folks, when they have this diagnosis, are known to fool the average individual, especially close family and friends, when they don't want to admit there's something wrong. I don't know if you've seen the movie Beautiful Mind, Russell Crowe. There's a scene where he enters in the cabin where his wife is really not privy to, and it's this area of refuge and experimentation. And there's all these notes hanging from the ceiling and the wall, and you get this impression of obvious psychotic break. Schizophrenia was his issue. So one day, and I hadn't been in my mom's condo for months, I'd pick her up regularly, bring her over to the house, and we'd have dinner, and I'd bring her back, or I'd ever Ubered back. And I walked into her condo, and there were notes everywhere. Very similar to that scene in Beautiful Mind. And one of them I first read was my sister's, whose name is Tanya, spelt with a Y, and it was spelt with an I, and it was a DOB, or date of birth, with a question mark on it. And I thought to myself, Wow. Yeah. So that was the first awakening I had that something was going down with my mom. Had her tested and assessed, and she was already well into stage two of Alzheimer's. So this got me thinking, the subtitle of the book, What Have You Done for Your Brain Today? The book itself is called Brain Spanners. The idea is that, we've come to revere and appreciate lifespan. That's how long that, ultimately we'll clock on our lifelong calendar. But we've graduated over to health span, the concept that, we want to not just sort of live longer, square the curve, and hopefully die in our sleep very quickly. But those ages, those years just prior to that knockoff, you want them the best quality. So that last decade of your life, and what are you doing to work backwards? Perhaps reverse engineer so that whether you're 90 or 95 or however old you're going to be, you're still able to push, pull, jump, squat, lift, move, walk, carry 30-pound bag of groceries a kilometer, be able to walk up a number of flight of stairs, physical as well as mental things. And then I took it one next level. Interviewed a number of experts in the field. I don't pretend to be the brain expert, although, as you know, every book you write's like a mini PhD.
Right.
So I
Well,
interviewed.
it is a PhD. It's not a mini PhD.
It is.
Books written well require so much research, and then you have to know that what you're doing is actually going to work. So you've applied it. So it really is like what else is a PhD?
I guess so. Although no one's really, you're not in front of a board and presenting your dissertation to
No,
pass.
you're in front of the consumers,
right? So
and your
that's
peers.
true.
They're even worse. Like, let's be honest.
You got it. So, the best of the best, you're in there as it pertains to brain health and exercise and nutrition, of course. We've got the likes of Dr. Andy Weil, our friend, Bill Harris. We've got Dr. Daniel Amen. A lot of the brain experts, and with the flair that I have and the appreciation for natural medicine. Really, that's the whole concept is what can we do naturally to expand our brain span? Because ultimately, again, lifespan's one thing, health span's another. But if we can achieve brain span is as long as we will live in optimal cognitive faculty, then that's the life you want to have. You know what's
cool about it too, Bryce, is that a lot of the things, and it always works this way, doesn't it? A lot of the things that you do that will help with brain span will also help with health span. So, that's the bonus. Now, having, had a son and having a son right now who had a severe traumatic brain injury and some neurodegeneration, which, boy, there's so much great stuff now that can reverse some of this stuff, which is amazing because like years ago, that was like wasn't going to happen. I've seen firsthand, like until you've really witnessed it, you don't realize just what happens when you start to lose brain function. It's absolutely frightening. And I would imagine like with your mom, you probably don't want to admit to yourself, right? So she wasn't admitting it to you, but she just, it's like my dad had a really bad cough and wouldn't get it checked. He didn't want to admit after being a smoker for 40 years that there could be a problem. And so that's a challenge because as we know, like the sooner you catch this, which you probably need to catch it immediately right now because by the time you start to see signs, right?
Starts in your 30s, way before there are signs or symptoms. And I wouldn't say regardless, but considering and factoring in genetics. In fact, one of my first interviews, the book kind of took its own evolution into what it became. But I interviewed Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote the book, of course, The End of Alzheimer's. And he subclassified, a number of subtypes of Alzheimer's, some of which are more glycotoxic or related to, glycemic index and overeating, sugars and refined carbohydrates. Another subset, which is more pro-inflammatory. There's some crossover there, of course. My mother's situation, though, amongst these 5 subtypes, turns out to be was toxic. So she grew up on a seed farm in England where the use of pesticides was abhorrent. And it seems to be that, among other things, she does have the genetic predisposition as it pertains to this allele that we've discovered, the ApoE variant. She's a 3-4, in fact, not the most predisposed being a 4-4. But anyways, all these different considerations for it turns out she was or is of the toxic predisposition. So yeah, a lot that I learned from Dr. Dale Bredesen was able to, as you put it, manage, stabilize, and even in some aspects, reverse. And that's true. And so even full circle to this whole concept of brain scanners, as you alluded to at the top, we're talking about, findings in the last decade that we absolutely have the power in late age to be or exude neurogenesis, which means new nerve cell, brain cell formation, neoplasticity, neuroplasticity. This is the idea that we can actually, couple and uncouple and recouple nerve connections, form new nerve connections. So the brain's active, and this is the whole premise of the book. The idea is that brain spanning and then living as long as we possibly can with optimal cognitive faculty is to appreciate both our genetic predispositions, our environmental, our diet, our lifestyle. And most of us know what we weigh. We know what our blood pressure is. We know what our cholesterol levels are typically, and we know all these different. But who knows what their hippocampal volume is? Like that's something people would be going, what is that? And we should all know. We should all have baseline MRIs. Maybe even starting as early as our 30s and 40s. The hippocampus, of course, is the memory center deep within our brain, and it has a certain size or a volume. And if we track that over time and we start to see it shrinking prematurely, that's a reason to get even more proactive about what you might be doing to keep a healthy brain. And a healthy brain literally translates into everything, every organ system, our immune system, our endocrine system, hormone system, metabolism, everything.
One of my favorite speakers and an old friend of mine is Dr. Daniel Amen. And I always love that he says, when it comes to your brain, size matters. And he's spec scanned my son Grant a number of times. We've also done neuroquant. So we've been watching his hippocampal volume. I would love you to talk about some of those things. And what you measure and monitor, you can improve.
That's right.
I'm so frustrated right now that we are at a point that we are in, 2022 and we still step on a scale instead of stepping on a body composition monitor. Like, it is so ludicrous to me. And that we don't just have people do continuous glucose monitoring periodically just to make sure that they're in check, that these are not just things like we have these tools now, we're not using them. But, no one's talking about measuring your hippocampal volume.
Yeah.
And monitoring that. Like, it's just not being talked about. How easy is it to get to test? Because it's not covered here in the States. And, I know we just paid for all this. And then what are some of the things that can cause, shrinkage? And then what can you do about it?
Sure. So I came to learn also in my research about the brain and to be able to preface this book. I love to do a biology 101, for most folks, just like you, doing a lot of media and just give people a better understanding as to, what this organ is in the first place. So in the book, I sort of, help folks to digest this whole idea and this concept of what the brain is. A lot of us understand the heart's a pump. A lot of us understand the lungs are like bags that, inspire and bring oxygen in and out, and how our guts work, but don't really understand the brain and certain features like the hippocampus and how much control we have over these things, as we're alluding to already. And by the way, Grant's story was in the book. It was a huge feature as to how he recovered. And I've had since, a few patients actually over the years with bad falls, and one off the fourth floor of a hotel in Cuba, who we actually put on the same protocol as Grant and did very, very well. So we can talk about that as well. But this whole idea of over evolution, there's that our brain has essentially evolved to become quite, I wouldn't call it fragile, more fragile than, perhaps it was millions of years ago. There's essentially four things, I revere in high regard here. One is genetic mutations that occurred. The discovery of fire, by the way, this is a very interesting thing. It's very relevant to your question, by the way, having more time by virtue of discovery of fire to eat, more time on our hands to eat and forage and walk around. And then, of course, agricultural practices, these things all happened, and they relate very much to this question of what can we do? How can we test? How do we approach the brain as it pertains to multi-system organs and its being in control? So I just love to preamble this with this sort of story that essentially about 5 million or so years ago, we don't know to the date exactly, but around that point, there's a single gene known as RGAP11B. And when we talk about genes, we're talking often about mutations and or switch outs or variants along a particular area, or let's call it a zip code on the gene. in this case, a single zip code, let's call it digit replacement in this gene known as RGAP11B, increased something called convolution, particularly in the prefrontal cortex. So, the brains in most mammals are quite smooth. Humans are very different for this one reason. Again, 5 million years ago, this mutation occurred. And the gene allowed for this ruga, or this large amount of convolution, to occur. That means more brain mass in a small space, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is, personality, and like a brake pedal as it pertains to, what we would otherwise do through our intuition or instinctual predisposition. Then about 2.5 million years ago or thereabouts, began to eat meat, marrow, a lot of the fat, perhaps even the fat is more important than the protein, muscle tissue providing these essential fats, but also B9, vitamin B9 and B12. So we began to eat meat. And then roughly 500,000 years later, about 2 million years later, we started cooking food with fire. That allowed us to digest food outside of our body, which freed up all this time on our hands. It took us about 8 hours or so prior to that to consume all our calories in the day, masticating, chewing, enzymatic, breaking down in the mouth, et cetera. But now we've got fire. Now we're cooking outside, and we're growing our brain with these methyl support B9, B12, and these essential fatty acids. And then only 50,000 years ago, really good evidence that there's a mutation, about this, in the FADS 1 and 2 gene. And this encodes the delta 60 saturase, which a lot about, which helped to increase essentially our absorption of alpha linoleic acid into the omega 3s, EPA, DHA. This assimilation of omega 3, of course, helped us to grow an even bigger brain. And there's a few other examples, but those 4 general examples, of course. And then the idea that we started to practice agricultural practices. So it started to grow grains and beans and legumes and all these other things, and stopped hunting and foraging around 30,000 years ago. In fact, the irony here is that as we developed intelligence, we soon realized that we no longer had to hunt and forage, began to practice this modern age agriculture and heavy grain diet, again, around 30,000 years ago. And now it's the processed diet, of course, which causes us the most disease, right?
We took it too far.
Right. And with fire and that other cooking technology, we can now consume all the calories we want in a single day, in a single drive-through, in 5 minutes or less, wolfing down a burger and fries. So
we need to go back. Bryce, just being in Peru, which has 192 microclimates, and looking at their gardening terraces, like when you go to Machu Picchu, those things are gardening terraces, and how they did this, and all the different varieties of potatoes and corn, and then the guinea pig they eat, and the alpaca. So it was like, holy smokes, like we did some great things, and then we took it too far. Like, we did, obviously, with some of the toxins that are now impacting the brain, right? And then the overabundance.
This is it. And so, and the real irony, in fact, and it's, it's probably the epitome of irony in this case, is that now, in order to satisfy or sort of reverse a lot of this, aging in the brain and deterioration of brain during our lives, is that we often go back to a raw food diet. I mean, I think that's extremely ironic. But so full circle to answer your question. So I understand this sort of evolution of our brain, understand how it's become very fragile in a few of these mutations. Worked in our favor. Obviously, we're a lot more intelligent, introspective. We have self-awareness and consciousness, but the brain's a lot more fragile than it ever was millions of years ago. So with that, and these practices around agriculture, this is again the bottom line. There are many tests in which we can assess not just brain function and volume. For that, in my clinical practice, I look at things like functional MRIs, looking at volume of like the hippocampus and so forth. And this is, a few $1,000s for most people. It's not so easy to absorb for a lot of folks, but getting this baseline is really important. There's other things though that we can do to analyze our glycemic index, or, looking at sugar over time. A hemoglobin A1C is a good example. We can look at our immune system. I often look at what's called a cytokine panel. These are all options, for folks to do a deeper dive in. Cytokines are inflammatory messengers, part of the immune system, that often get tied into this brain-gut connection that we're coming to learn more about. When there is leaky gut, we're hearing more about that as well. There is leaky brain. So one of the first tests I do to identify whether there's problems with the brain is I look at something called zonulin. This is a test that a lot of folks can access. It's a little protein marker. Essentially, it's supposed to keep, we have absorption in our gut. We're supposed to be able to absorb nutrients, both macro and micronutrients. But when we're hyperpermeable, and that is to suggest there is a leakiness in the gut, then there are things that move from your gut into your general circulation, which probably shouldn't. In fact, they shouldn't. And they can ultimately permeate and leak into the brain. When there's a leaky gut scenario, there's a leaky brain scenario. So that's something I like to screen for.
So
micronutrients.
I'm looking at this though. So like if someone were to do a hippocampal volume test, so they did a functional MRI, they looked at that, they'd still need to figure out if they are not where they should be. And even if there's where there should be, like what do we need to do to make sure that we're not creating any assaults to it? You're still going to have to figure out if you are less than you should be, why it is. And that could be anything from, could be toxins. So I guess you would see this in some of your genetics, could be blood sugar, could be stress. I remember, boy, when I was under chronic stress and, like all of a sudden your memory's going, you're like, right? So you'd still have to go back after that point and go, what the heck's impacting it?
Absolutely.
And so the reverse of it is, going and looking at all the things that could impact your brain, which impact your health anyway. Like if you've got poor glycemic control, you're going to have challenges if you don't.
And this is exactly what I was getting to. So if we consider the brain as the most important organ, it's irrefutable that it is. It's a two-way highway as it pertains to those cardiovascular markers we care so much about. I mean, cholesterol is a bit of an old story, but what are the inflammatory, either the cytokines or oxidized LDL that affects the heart? It's going to affect the brain as well. What are the blood sugar measures? What are the toxins the liver is dealing with? It's going to directly impact the brain. But if we revere the brain first and foremost as that organ that we care most about, that there are tests for, like we keep bringing up this functional MRI for hippocampal volume. If that's shrinking over time, there are ways in which you can manage that shrinkage, even reverse that shrinkage. That's the good news. And often that's done by managing the systemic effect of blood sugar, micronutrient status, omega-3 fatty acid status, exercise, stress. I think that we're in a state more now than ever, I believe, of dysautonomia, this imbalance between sympathetic and parasympathetic state, the ability to manage, not just cope, manage with stress effectively, be able to get into a state of parasympathetic dominance versus sympathetic dominance. That shrinks cortisol, as you know, shrinks the brain. And certainly substance abuse that Dr. Amen, as we both know, is always all about, no matter whether it's marijuana has become more legalized or it's alcohol. These are legal drugs, but they're shrinking the brain more than anything, including the hippocampus. The good news, though, and I mean, this is really my area of expertise, there is nutrition, select aspects of nutrition and how to manage not just macros or macronutrients, but micronutrients by understanding first your genetics and some of these other tests we talk about. And then nootropics. These are things that we can consume in supplement form that we believe there's good science, not always, but often pretty good science to appreciate supplementing with these ingredients can actually add to your potential for neurogenesis, new nerve cell, brain cell formation, and neuroplasticity, the ability to regrow and reform new nerve cell connections.
Now, I know everyone's going to get a ebook of your brain spanners, which is awesome. And I'm going to put that at jjvirgin.com/brain spanners. But right now, just so super actionable, someone listening right now, when you just mentioned nutrition, like give like what are a couple things they could do nutrition-wise will have an impact, massive impact on their brain. Then we're going to go through the list. Let's start there.
Yeah, so my number one is omega-3, and obviously this plays its story well through Grant's trauma and recovery.
Oh my gosh, but I had to sneak it into the hospital because it
at
could
therapeutic
be so
ranges, right?
damaging. I'm like,
so that's actually why I brought us through that very super top line, evolution. This FADS1 and 2 gene that controls for an enzyme. It's the single gene that controls for such an important enzyme that converts this alpha linoleic acid, into very essential omega-3 fatty acids. We wouldn't have grown the brain that we currently have, the brain that I refer to as more fragile than it ever was in our evolutionary spectrum. This is so important to the brain omega-3 fatty acids. In fact, we're fatheads. Our brain is like 60%. Some authorities say more percent fat. And within the nerve cell membrane, along with our red blood cell membrane, there has to be a certain saturation of this particularly important fat in order for cell-to-cell communication to occur, what we call depolarization. We're bioelectric beings, so there's all this biology and chemistry about us, but we're also electrical. So we have these electrical impulses, which translate to thoughts and emotions and executive function. So saying all that is to say that omega-3 levels, I believe, are very important. Most of us walk around just like with vitamin D deficiencies. We walk around with omega-3 deficient status. And that's terribly impactful negatively to our brain. This is the work, by the way, of Dr. Bill Harris, who you know well, as simple as an at-home finger blood stick test, right? So with a little couple of drops of blood, we can submit to the lab and identify our omega-3 red blood cell membrane concentrations. To get that corrected, most of us walk around with 3 or 4%. We want 8% or higher, and that is imperative to cardiovascular health and brain health, particularly. So that's number one. Getting hold and understanding your.
And by the way, I got to just shout this out. You're probably not going to be able to fix that with food alone.
Yeah, exactly. So good point. So a lot of what I preach, a lot of what I talk about is going above and beyond dietary or nutritional intervention. I really feel that in many cases, you can't eat yourself to therapeutic level. Nor in some cases do we want to, because sometimes this is more about what we avoid than what we put in. And so when we're talking about fish, right, fatty fish, they're typically the larger fish. One of the most popular, of course, is salmon. And when you can get a very good clean salmon, which is very difficult, then of course eating that every other day is a great idea. Still hard to get therapeutic ranges. And so with that said, I mean, again, we're trying to avoid things like heavy metals, dioxins, furans, parabens, all these different things that affect the brain negatively, and they can come with fatty fish. So
I know
bit
it's
of
just
a
a
paradox.
different. This is not, our 20,000, 30,000 years ago fish. Sadly,
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because all the pesticides and stuff we're using are running off somewhere.
Exactly.
So
that's number one in my opinion. Number two, and maybe just to continue on this toxin front, is to understand how well you detoxify from a genetic perspective. Some of us do it way better than others. We've come to learn that the brain doesn't have lymph like the rest of the body, the ability for the liver and the lymphatic system to rid of waste. It's got a glymphatic with a G. So glial cells, these are non-thinking cells, and they are responsible, particularly at night under the right conditions, which happens to be very cool, 68 degrees or so, deep, restful sleep. This is when the glial cells wake up and detoxify the brain. And I don't mean these ethereal, toxins that are emitted from the smokestacks of industry. I'm talking about our own metabolic waste on a day-to-day basis. So just living and breathing and eating, we make waste. Sleep, it turns out, one of the most important factors of sleep and recharging, resetting the brain has to do with this glymphatic activity. So detoxifying the brain and how well we do that, there's ways in which we can keep the finger on the pulse to our systemic levels of detoxification.
You just gave a great piece of information. I just want to highlight again, because, we talk, when we talk about sleep, we're like, get your bedroom to 68 or below, right? And I remember when I first met my husband, I'm like, this was one of ours. I'm like, honey, got to take the temp down. But you just gave a very good reason for why we need to do this. So just hit that one more time, just in case someone's like, I don't want to be cold.
Yeah, the glymphatic system, the brain's detox ability to clear up the mess of the day prior, relies on cool temps. It just doesn't work unless you've got your sleep hygiene appropriated. And that means cool, comfortable, blackout blinds, all that we've heard about, in terms of that optimization of sleep hygiene. But the most important thing, neck and head out of the covers, is that it's cool. They don't activate. They don't wake up and detoxify the brain unless it is 65 to 68 research shows is the optimal levels. So optimizing detoxification by first testing both genetic ability. I'm a co-founder of the DNA company. I think we run one of the best panels for.
I totally agree. We had Kashif on the podcast. It was fabulous, incredible reports. We ran one on me, on Grant, on my husband, Tim. So great information that's super actionable and super easy to understand. And ideally, this is just going to be something that you're born, you have a genetic test. And then the information gets updated as new information comes out. So you just know where you need to focus if you're
That's right.
if you're a good detoxifier or not. I think even if you're a good detoxifier, my husband and I, every single day that we're home, we get in our sunlight and sauna. That's one of the things we do. We weren't doing it, Bryce, and I was like, okay, we got a cold plunge. We were really good about that, and I was like, but we meditate every morning. So now we take Dr. Joe Dispenza in the sauna with us, do that. So we're killing two birds with one stone. I don't know where that saying came from. And then we go and cold plunge after.
Well, I think that falls on this list. I was going to hit that up next after methylation. So park that thought for a minute, because I believe there's a way to be, testing, knowing your numbers, keeping your finger on the pulse of sympathetic hyperactivity. So this is that whole idea, the notion that stress shrinks our brain. And things like saunas and deep cold plunges and things like that help us to essentially enhance or improve a parasympathetic tone or vagal tone. So I'll definitely get to that in a sec. But methylation is another big one. So it's almost synonymous with inflammation. This is the ability of our body. I refer to this as a sort of like a relay race, right? You've got 5 runners in your team, and you've got a baton, and they've got to pass the baton, obviously, and clear the finish line in order to win the race, or at least do well. That baton is a methyl group, or CH3 in biochemistry. And so passing that baton along requires these 5 genes to work really well. And again, you can test for these genes to determine where you've got issue. Often a lot of us have methylation defect. We're dropping that baton, disqualifying from finishing this race. This is the responsibility of B12 and the right types of B12, depending on who you are genetically, and B9 or folate, in order to get that baton through one racer to the next to finish this race. So a lot of us have genetic glitches as it pertains to methylation, and if and when we do, we have brain problems, and we have brains on fire for a lot of folks. DNA, this applies to, genetic, sequence anomalies and keeping an intact gene pool, preventing genetic mutation. So testing and understanding methylation, that's really important as well. And I love this urinary test. Anyone can access this, which is basically a downstream analytic for inflammation. So again, methylation and inflammation go together to determine systemic levels of inflammation, because when inflammation is high, and we've talked about a few things that might contribute to that, toxins in the environment, leaky gut means leaky brain. When there's inflammation, there's problems. There's a test called 11-dehydrothromboxane. Very easy test to run on urine. It's called the chronic inflammation test. Folks can look this up. You submit this. This is way downstream, COX, all the way down to the very sort of end. How pro-inflamed are you? You're systemically and your brain inclusive. How inflamed are you? And then
now, is that acute? Question on that test. Let's say that you ate some really inflammatory stuff the day before. Is this more of a hemoglobin A1C test, or is this more of a fasting glucose test?
More of in the middle. Bingo. More of in the middle. So great question. It's not quite that 3-month endpoint or that acute. You can't. The most influential component of this test is whether or not you're taking any form of NSAIDs, aspirin in particular. That's going to skew you favorably. But otherwise, there's very little you could do over one night. It'd be more of the course of a couple of weeks that would impact one way or the other. And by the way, omega-3 fatty acids, as we've come to learn, are incredibly anti-inflammatory. So your omega-3, they've done these studies, omega-3 saturation is directly correlated with downstream 11-dehydrothromboxane. So great idea to keep your finger on the pulse for general levels of inflammation and methylation. And I said I'd bring it up. I think that people have to understand better where their not perceived stress, because for stress is for one person, one thing. It's a different thing for another person. We can learn to manage it better. Most people cope with it. You can check 4-point cortisol. I like that test as a salivary. Cortisol, of course, is one of the most important, stress endpoints that we can look at. Shrinks the brain. So I run this 4-point over the course of the day. It's supposed to peak up in the morning and then kind of come down over the course of the evening and afternoon to prepare you for sleep. But we are in a state, I believe, of hypersympathetic or sympathetic dominance. We're always go, go, go. We're always just constantly fired up.
It's revered. Let's face it, right?
Right. Right.
you're celebrated if you're in that state.
And so this is the way of the world. And I'm not saying there's easy ways, and there's some easy ways, breathing. There's ways in which we can ultimately increase tone, vagal tone, or parasympathetic tone. You just mentioned a few. So going into your sauna, really good evidence around this ultimately improving heart rate variability, which is directly correlated with vagal or parasympathetic tone. Immersion in cold, environments such as, a cold ice bath.
Which is awful.
But these are terribly, they're just stressful environments. So you
But
got
I
to
do
think
it every day. 10 minutes I'm in there every day now. 10 minutes. I just want credit.
and so you know what? So what that's doing in the moment is, of course, is creating stress. But it is the return. So the more practice makes perfect. The more you practice this in conjunction. I love the breathing techniques taught by Wim Hof. I think if people aren't familiar with him, they should look him up. Also simple breathing like box breathing, 4-4-4 rule, or 5-7-8 rule, all these different rules that people can invoke, being able to manage stress in the moment, such as, a cold immersion in an ice bath. But it's not the immediate experience, that very stressful, I want to get the hell out of that cold immersion experience. It's the return to that parasympathetic state. Like everything is fine. I survived that. I'm going to be okay. That translates into the brain and mental aptitude that you survived, and the speed at which you are able to return to parasympathetic state. So again, from stress, fight or flight, to relax, rest, and digest. The speed at which you do that happens faster and faster over time with more practice.
It's like exercise,
Bingo.
and I was an exercise physiologist first. And one of our big things was how quickly could you go from a, target to max heart rate all the way to recovery. And that's how we would track. And the challenge here is it's easy to track heart rate. How do you track, I just moved from sympathetic to parasympathetic? Like, how would you track that? Just
so again,
at HRV or what?
Yeah, exactly. I would be looking at heart rate variability in the moment anyways. And of course, the more variable you are, we could dive into that, but the more variable your heart rate is, beat to beat, the more likely you are in an optimal state. That is to say, more likely able to quickly translate from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and digest. I like using technology as much as possible, but I think biochemistry is the more telltale over time. And so that 4-point cortisol tells me a lot. This is where I get into neurotransmitters. This is where I start looking at urinary neurotransmitters on average every 3 months for a lot of folks who typically, so there's 2 types of neurotransmitters. There's inhibitory. They ultimately are very, very useful. We don't have enough of those as a society by and large. And there's excitatory. I think, again, like we are in the state of sympathetic dominance, our excitatory neurohormones are often too high. So you can be in sympathetic state or always stressed out and having negative mental, emotional experiences related to a neurochemical imbalance or neurotransmitter imbalance because your neuroinhibitory levels are too low, such as GABA. I see that all the time. Gamma aminobutyric acid, it's a neurotransmitter. You can also supplement with this. It's often too low. It makes the individual feel as if they are in sympathetic dominance, or in some cases, neuroexcitatory hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline, serotonin, they're too high. So I work with folks in order to help balance and equilibrate those things, often using amino acids or phytonutrients, biochemical, what we call modulation is the end game. So there's all kinds of wonderful functional biochemistry that we can look at to help folks manage this from a neurological nutrition supplementation form. But dysautonomia, one of the things I personally do besides cold dunks like you and saunas is forest bathing. This is something the Japanese call Shinrin Yoku.
I was right. So I was just at Asheville for a wedding at the Biltmore, and they had that they had 2 things on the list of like activities, and one of them was chocolate meditation, which sadly I was not around for. I'm like, I'm in. And the other one was that, but they both were there. I couldn't fit the schedule, and I was like, what on earth is forest bathing? What is it?
So it's really interesting. So this is not just getting out into nature and immersing yourself in greenery and having a nice time, walking around a forest, although it is that. There's a number of elements to forest bathing the Japanese refer to this, and particularly the Okinawa, which is kind of like Hawaii paradise offshore of Japan, where centenarians, people that live beyond 100, exist in large population compared to the average, particularly females actually, and they've made it a habit of science of forest bathing. So a couple of factors are going on here. One, this is just like we talked about a moment ago, hormetic. So hormesis is that really perfect sort of bell curve where too little of something, a substance or a stressor, whether it's exercise or cold plunging, too little of that's not going to do much. Too much might kill you, but it's that perfect Goldilocks zone of getting the right exposure. Turns out, phytocinins, which are naturally emitted volatile organic compounds from nature, from plants, from trees, are emitted that cause us just enough stress that our natural killer cells are evoked. So our immune system, frontline innate immunity goes up in a forest amongst greenery. Turns out there's also negative ions, which counterintuitively might sound bad for you, but actually really good for you. These negative ions boost serotonin, a feel-good hormone. Particularly, and of course, you're familiar with Huberman, the Huberman lab. When you do this first thing in the morning and you get that amazing sunlight coming through the tree crests and hitting the bottom of your eye, where most of your photoreceptors are, shutting off melatonin, the sleep hormone. The brain only wants that at night, and turning on serotonin, the day hormone. That's going to evoke more than just feel good and a proper circadian rhythm, translating to a better sleep at night. But again, so immune function goes up, feel good. You do this with people, other friends or family, and you're now emoting. And so there's an impression the heart has.
But what are you doing? So Tim and I went out hiking. To me, hiking is you go up a hill. So I hiked in Peru. This was not hiking. It was walking through the forest. But when they call it forest bathing, are you lying in the dirt? What are you doing? Are you just standing there? What is forest bathing?
You're not grabbing a bar of Irish Spring and washing down. It's exactly like you said. You don't even have. We're explaining all the benefits here, but at the end of the day, forest bathing is just you immersing yourself in thick green nature. You already did it. That's it. It's that easy. But by doing it.
Here's the thing, Bryce, I'll tell you. So we were also staying in an Airbnb with a bunch of friends, and we went hiking out there 2 days in a row. And on the second day driving down to the hike, we saw a family of black bears. Now, it's very different hiking when there are bears about. It's a very different, you are on total alert, right? So maybe that was part of it. I don't know. Maybe that's part of forest bathing.
Yeah, what is it? Black, fight back, brown, lie down, white. I can't remember. But anyways, the idea is, of course, you're just going to want to be in some place where there's, a sense of, trust that you're safe.
Yeah, there's no spiders, poison oak or ivy, and no bears. But that doesn't exist. I guess that would be like a Disney forest. Yeah. Anyway, that is super cool. I could go on all day with you now. I'm glad that that you are giving the book, because I know we've just touched the surface of this, and I think the big through line of this is, again, and you have lifespan. We've looked at lifespan without health span makes no sense. Who wants to live a long time poorly? That's the worst thing I can imagine, is living and being kind of trapped in your body or trapped in your mind. So
terrible.
Then there's the health span, but that really doesn't address really keeping that cognitive ability up. And so I love this new coining of brain span, because it is so key critical. So you're going to get the book. It's jjvirgin.com/brain spanners to get the ebook that will give you what you need to look for and what you can measure and then what you can do about it. And as you saw, there's a lot of information that you wouldn't normally think about. And I'll tell you, I think that kind of moving forward, we're seeing a big shift. At least I hope we are, and it's not just because I'm focusing on it, but that this shift to really looking at our nervous system, knowing that we need to make this sympathetic to parasympathetic shift, that we've got to take care of our nervous system we never talked about before. I think that the pandemic's shown a bright light on what is going on, and that if we don't take care of this, it's going to massively take down our health, and especially our brain health.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And there's why I would be remiss if I didn't also, we talk about it in the book, but if I didn't also underscore the importance of testing annually something as simple as a Montreal Mini Mental. keeping an awareness as to your cognitive scores. This is memory and function of the brain.
Where would someone do that?
Very inexpensively with their family doctor. Just request it earlier, and folks can understand how their predisposition to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's might be upon them, and there's a lot they can do, of course, to reverse, manage, stop, and even reverse that. Nice.
And yeah, I think that's the most important thing here is I know preventative health is the toughest thing to sell, but boy, especially with brain health, you don't wait till you start to really see signs and you're in trouble. So
it's the subtitle of the book. If folks really want to wake up and do something, the most important thing they can do for their health is ask themselves that very question: what have I done for my brain today? And it should be a plethora, multifactorial number of things. And if they do that, they will advantage the rest of their body, as we just concluded.
Nice. That's a great way to end. What have you done for your brain today? Thank you so much, Dr. Bryce Wylde. I super appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Oh my gosh, forest bathing. I mean, who knew? I got to tell you, when I heard forest bathing, I'm like, are these like people running around the forest naked? What is this? So now we know. Now we know. I'm going to just do my backyard bathing, I think is what I'm going to start with, since I have palm trees and grass and I live on a canal, which is super awesome. So I want to remind you again, be sure to grab that book, jjvirgin.com/brainspanners. And if you've not yet subscribed to the show, go to subscribe2jj.com. There you go. So you never miss an episode. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.